The mist slowly crept over the hills, covering the farm with a silver blanket. Each morning, breath filled my lungs with cool, moist air, and the dewdrops on the grass sparkled like tiny gems. A light breeze gently swayed the branches of the trees, and it seemed as if even nature was holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable. I stood by the window, gazing into the milky twilight, and a strange feeling enveloped me, as if I were on the verge of changes that could alter everything. The farm had always been our sanctuary, a place to hide from the world. Here, amidst the fields and endless horizons, Mark and I created a cozy space where every day felt like the one before, filled with a familiar routine. But recently, I had started feeling that this routine was becoming a cage. The simple life on the farm had lost its charm, and the endless discussions about the future began to feel like a burden. In the past few weeks, I found myself thinking more and more about how much I lacked freedom. I wanted to break away, to go somewhere far away, to a place where no one knew me or my story. With this thought, I decided to join the trip with my friends, Catherine, Megan, and Jessica. We planned to spend a few days in a small resort town, enjoying each other's company, the fun, and the lightness that is not always easy to find in everyday life. There would be men in our group, friends of my friends, but for me, it was just a part of the carefree break I so desperately needed. When I told Mark about my plans, he seemed to take it calmly, but I noticed how his gaze became more cautious and an almost imperceptible hint of discontent appeared in his voice. "Why do you want to go alone?" he asked one evening, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. I could feel that he didn't trust me, even though his words sounded like ordinary concern. I knew he didn't like the idea of a trip without him. Mark was used to always being around, controlling every little detail, but I needed this time for myself. I wanted to spend it with my friends, enjoy the company of those who made me feel light and free, those with whom I could laugh and talk about everything in the world without fear of judgment or jealousy. "I need some time for myself," I said softly, trying to sound convincing. "Just a few days to relax and unwind. It's just a trip with my girlfriends." But I knew my words wouldn't convince him. In his eyes, I saw a shadow of suspicion. "There will be men," he finally said, voicing what had been troubling him all this time. I sighed and nodded. "Yes, there will be. But it doesn't matter, Mark," I tried to explain. "I just want to have fun and relax a bit." And while my words sounded confident, deep down, I knew it wasn't entirely true. I wanted more, to feel freedom, to taste something new and unknown. It seemed to me that this was my chance to understand what I really wanted, but I had no idea how real these feelings would become. I stood in front of the open wardrobe, sorting through my clothes. Time was running out, and I needed to finish packing. I took a small lace set from the dresser, delicate and revealing, in a deep burgundy color. My fingers trembled slightly as I carefully folded it into my bag. I had bought this lingerie recently, thinking about feeling more confident, more feminine, but suddenly I heard Mark's voice behind me. "Are you really taking that with you?" His tone was sharp, almost accusatory. I flinched and turned around, noticing him standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on my bag. "Yes, I'm taking it," I replied, trying to sound calm, though I already knew where this was going. "Why does it bother you so much, Mark?" He stepped forward, his face growing darker. "Why are you even bringing such lingerie? You're going with your friends." I felt irritation boiling inside me. "Because I like it," I said, trying not to lose my composure. "It makes me feel confident, feminine." But his gaze remained tense. "Confident? Feminine? Who are you trying to impress, Hannah?" "Mark, it's just for me," I snapped, realizing that my explanations would not help. "You always make a mountain out of a molehill. It's just lingerie." But he didn't back down. "You expect me to believe that this is just for you? Why then are you insisting on going alone?" I rolled my eyes. "I've explained it before, Mark. I need space. I need time for myself. I want a bit of freedom from all this," I said, gesturing around the farm. His eyes narrowed, and I knew I had hurt him. "Freedom from me?" he whispered, and I heard the pain in his voice. "It's not like that, Mark." I sighed, feeling exhausted. "I just need some time alone, without your constant suspicions and control." He looked at me for a long time, suspicion written all over his face. "You want me to believe that this is all about your personal space?" I felt my patience wearing thin. "Yes, Mark, that's exactly what I want you to understand." But I could see he didn't believe me. I saw the fear and distrust in his eyes. He had always been afraid of losing me, afraid I would leave. And maybe he was right. But right now, I just wanted one thing: to leave. To leave and find myself, find the answers I had been searching for so long. We stood in silence, and the quiet felt unbearable. I knew my words hadn't reassured him, that he still thought what he wanted to think. But what else could I say? I grabbed my bag and, without looking back, left the room. When I finally reached the resort town, it felt like a heavy burden had been lifted off my shoulders. The beach, with its white sand and turquoise water, stretched out before me, as if inviting me to forget all my worries. I took a deep breath of fresh sea air and felt a lightness spread throughout my entire body. But just as I began to enjoy this sense of freedom, my phone vibrated in my pocket. Mark. Again. His messages kept popping up on the screen, one after another. "Where are you? Did you arrive? Why aren't you answering?" I stared at the screen, feeling my mood start to sour. "What's wrong?" Catherine approached me and glanced over my shoulder at my phone's screen. I quickly shoved it back into my pocket. "Nothing," I replied with a forced smile. "Mark's just worried," Catherine smirked. "Let him worry. We're here to relax. Don't forget, we have a beach party tonight." I nodded, deciding she was right. I came here for freedom, to disconnect from everything, including Mark and his constant attempts to control everything. I looked at my phone again, but this time I decided not to reply. Let him think whatever he wants. I deserved this time. All day I tried to forget about his messages, but every time the phone vibrated in my pocket, I felt irritation rising inside me. Mark was restless. He wanted to know where I was, what I was doing, who I was with. But right now, I didn't want to think about him. I decided to fully immerse myself in fun and relaxation. In the evening, we headed to the beach. When I saw the bonfire lights and heard the loud music, I felt a surge of energy. I wanted to lose myself in this night, in this music. I started dancing, feeling the rhythm penetrate every cell of my body. My movements became freer than usual. I danced, forgetting everything else. My body seemed to have a life of its own. I knew I shouldn't be acting like this, that it could lead to something I hadn't planned, but I couldn't stop. Excitement and tension filled me. Every movement brought a new sense of freedom, and I didn't want to lose it. I kept dancing, feeling everything around me fade away. There was only the music and my resolve to allow myself more than usual. Tonight, I wouldn't answer the messages. Tonight, I would be myself, not who Mark wanted me to be. The party on the first night of our vacation turned out to be wild. From the very beginning, everything went differently than I had imagined. We danced to the sound of loud music, laughed, chatted, and I let myself indulge too much. Drink after drink, I downed cocktails, feeling the alcohol slowly spreading through my body, relaxing me and erasing all boundaries. Everyone around seemed so happy, so free. I wanted to feel the same. That's when I first noticed Eric. Tall, with a slight stubble and sea-green eyes, he stood out from the rest. He was part of my friends' group who had come for this vacation, but until that moment, I hadn't paid much attention to him. He approached me with a smile and introduced himself. "Eric," he said, extending his hand. I smiled back, feeling a light fog of alcohol in my head. "Hannah," I replied, holding his hand a little longer than I should have. He started joking and telling stories, and I didn't notice how I began to flirt back. It seemed like harmless fun. After all, I was far from home, no one knew me here, and I could afford a little frivolity. With each drink, my laughter became louder, and my touches on his arm grew bolder. At some point, Eric leaned closer, his eyes sparkling in the light of the bonfire. "You're amazing," he whispered, and I felt my heart skip a beat. I tried to brush off the feeling. "Thank you," I replied, but my voice no longer had the confidence it had before. The excitement I felt was growing by the minute. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop. I allowed myself more and more, as if trying to see how far I could go. Later, when the party began to quiet down, Eric suggested going to the beach. "Let's look at the stars," he suggested. I agreed, knowing it might be a mistake, but unable to resist the desire to continue this flirtation. We walked out to the sea. The night was clear, the stars shone brightly, and all around us was just the sound of the waves. Eric moved closer and gently hugged me, and I felt a shiver run through my body. I knew I shouldn't have done it, but I gave in to the feelings. My hand instinctively slid onto his leg. Eric pulled me closer, and I felt a wave of excitement coursing through my entire body. My mind kept telling me it was wrong, that I should stop, but I couldn't. I was too caught up in the moment, too caught up in the fact that everything was happening far from home, where no one knew me. I understood this was a step into the unknown, but that very feeling made everything so thrilling. That evening, something changed with Eric. Our conversation grew more intimate, and I noticed how his hand would occasionally brush against mine. The alcohol, the noise of the party, the warm night air, all of it blended into a dizzying mix, and I felt my heart beating faster. "Come to my room," he suggested, his voice low and hushed, as if he was whispering just to me. I hesitated, but finally agreed. Inside, I kept telling myself that it was just flirting, that nothing serious would happen. But I was drawn to the attention, the passion that I so lacked in my relationship with Mark. We went up to his room, and I could feel the tension hanging in the air. The lights were dim, creating an aura of mystery. I couldn't help but notice the way he looked at me. His eyes sparkled as if he already knew what would happen next, and I knew it too. I assured myself that everything would remain a secret, that no one would ever know about this little adventure. But the tension between us grew, and I let myself get lost in the moment. We were too close to ignore what was happening. Eric came closer, his hand sliding over my shoulders, and I couldn't resist. Our lips met in a kiss. At that moment, everything else disappeared. The sounds of the bed linens, the soft rustle of clothes being removed, touches that made my body shiver with excitement. I wasn't thinking about anything except his hands, his lips. All that mattered was in this room, in this moment. And then, suddenly, my eyes fell on the phone lying on the bedside table. The screen was lit up. New messages from Mark. The phone vibrated in silent mode, and I saw it ringing again and again. For a moment, a flicker of guilt and doubt sparked inside me. I slowly approached the phone to check the notifications from Mark. feeling my resolve waver. But at that moment, Eric came up behind me, his hands gently resting on my hips, gripping them tightly. I felt an unexpected warmth spread through my entire body, and all thoughts of the phone, the messages of Mark disappeared as if they had never existed. His hands gripped my body firmly, and I felt a new flame ignite within me. At that moment, I no longer wanted to be distracted, no longer wanted to think of anything else but what was happening right now. I put the phone aside, allowing myself to surrender completely to the moment. The whole night passed like a wild, passionate dream. We completely lost ourselves in each other, oblivious to time or reality. It was an escape from everything I had ever known, from all the rules and restrictions, into a new, unexplored world where there was no room for doubt or fear. When I woke up the next morning, the sun's rays were streaming through the curtains, filling the room with a soft light. Everything seemed so ordinary and calm that for a moment I forgot about the events of the previous night. But then I turned my head and saw Eric sleeping beside me. My heart started pounding, a reminder of what had happened. I carefully slipped out of bed, trying not to wake him. I decided that this would remain my little secret, one that no one would ever know about. After all, I was far from home, where no one knew me. It was just a fleeting affair, a flash of passion that meant nothing. I would go back home, and everything would be as it was. I even felt a slight sense of relief, thinking about how easy it would be to forget all of this. I put on my clothes, glanced at Eric, who was still asleep, and left the room. My heart was racing, but I kept reassuring myself, repeating that it was just one incident, one mistake that no one would ever find out about. I headed down the hotel hallway toward the elevator, but suddenly I felt like someone was watching me. I turned around and saw Sophie. She was standing at the end of the corridor, her face tense and serious. My heart skipped a beat. It can't be, I thought, hoping it was just a coincidence. But from the look in her eyes, I knew she had seen everything. Sophie knew I had spent the night in Eric's room. I tried to smile and act like everything was fine, but her gaze was full of determination. Panic began to rise inside me. "Sophie, it's not what you think," I started, but she had already turned and walked away, leaving me alone. Later that day, I tried to talk to her, to explain that it was a mistake, that it meant nothing. But Sophie was firm. "You have to tell Mark," she said quietly but with a force in her voice, "or I will." I felt the world around me begin to crumble. "Sophie, please don't," I pleaded, knowing this could end in disaster. But there was a determination in her eyes that I had never seen before. Sophie was a friend, but she had always believed that honesty was the only way to maintain relationships. And now, I knew she wouldn't let this go. My little secret was under threat. I had thought I could return home as if nothing had happened. But now everything had changed. I could lose everything I had because of one moment of weakness. I watched Sophie walk away, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. I returned to my room, feeling a shadow of fear settle over my heart. Now all I could do was wait for everything to unravel. When I left the room, my thoughts were tangled. I knew I needed to call Mark, to calm him down. His messages were still unread, and I realized I needed to reply. Otherwise, he would keep worrying. Doubts and fear mixed into a strange feeling of unease. I dialed his number, and he picked up almost immediately. His voice was tense. "Hannah, where were you? Why weren't you answering my messages?" he asked, his voice shaking with anxiety. I took a deep breath and tried to speak softly. "Mark, I'm so sorry. It was the first day after I arrived. Everything was so hectic, I just forgot. There's so much going on here. I didn't have a chance. I tried to sound as sincere as possible, even though I felt a tight knot of anxiety inside. On the other end of the line, I heard him sigh. "You have no idea how worried I was," he said, a bit quieter, but with a hint of reproach still in his voice. "I understand, Mark, really, but I'm fine. Everything's okay," I replied, trying to sound calm. "All right." He seemed a bit more relaxed, though I could still sense some tension. "Just, please, keep me updated. I want to know you're all right." "Of course, I promise," I said, and felt some of the weight lift off my shoulders. I hung up and sighed with relief. It seemed like Mark didn't know anything, which gave me hope. But soon, I began to notice Sophie's strange behavior. From the very morning, she avoided me. Her look was distant, and her answers to my questions were short and curt. I tried to brush it off as fatigue or a usual bad mood, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. I tried not to pay attention and continued to act as if nothing had happened, but her aloofness was too obvious to ignore. A few days passed, and I began to suspect that my secret was out. There was something in her behavior that made me nervous. She avoided eye contact with me, left when I entered the room, and even stopped participating in our group conversations. I felt a growing fear inside me. Could she have told Mark? But there was nothing suspicious in his messages. He wrote as usual. "How was your day? What's new? I miss you." These simple words reassured me, making me believe that maybe everything was fine. Maybe Sophie had stayed silent after all. I tried to convince myself that nothing was wrong, but deep down, I knew something was off. At night, I fell asleep with a heaviness in my chest, not knowing what the morning would bring, and continued to hope that this was all just my fears and imaginings. I returned home, trying to convince myself that everything would be fine. The journey felt endlessly long, and every movement of the vehicle echoed through my thoughts. "Mark knows nothing," I repeated to myself over and over, hoping that everything would remain as it was. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I tried not to think about the worst. When I arrived at our house, I suddenly noticed that something was wrong. My suitcases and bags were set out right on the porch. I froze, unable to comprehend what was happening. My heart clenched with shock. Slowly, I walked up to the door and reached for the handle, but it didn't budge. The lock had been changed. I felt a wave of panic rise inside me. What is this?" I whispered, staring at my belongings as if they could somehow give me an answer. I quickly took out my phone and dialed Mark. No answer. I sent a message. "Mark, what's going on? Why are my things outside?" A few minutes passed before his reply appeared on the screen. "I did it as unexpectedly as I found out about your affair. See you at the registry office. Bring the divorce papers. I don't want to hear anything else." The words hit me like a whip. I stood in shock, unable to grasp reality. Everything I had feared had come true. I had been exposed, and Mark knew everything. My desire to escape and have fun away from home had turned into a disaster. I tried calling him again, but he didn't answer. I sent a few more messages, trying to explain, but all of them went unread. My eyes filled with tears, and I began to realize that this was no dream. This was my reality. My future with Mark was shattered. I sank to my knees beside my suitcases, feeling the tears streaming down my cheeks. Everything I had once known was broken. He had thrown me out of his life as suddenly as he found out about my betrayal. My little secret had turned into a complete catastrophe. I felt humiliated and shattered. I wanted to scream. I wanted to wake up from this nightmare. But I knew there was no waking up. this was the reality I had chosen, a reality that was now my life. At the registry office, everything went exactly as I had feared. Mark didn't look at me even once. His face remained cold and distant, as if I were nothing. I tried to catch his eye, wanted to say something, but his gaze was fixed straight ahead, as if I didn't exist. We signed the papers quickly and without emotion. Each signature felt like a sentence, a mark on our memories, on the promises we had once made to each other. I wanted to start a conversation, to explain, to try to find some understanding. But Mark refused any dialogue. He avoided me as if I were something dirty, something he wanted to get rid of as quickly as possible. When it was all over, he walked out without a word. I was left standing in the corridor, feeling the world collapse around me. I was left with nothing, not a single farewell glance, not a single attempt to understand. I realized it was over. Our life, which we had built over the years, had crumbled in an instant. I went back to my parents. The small house where I had spent my childhood now felt like a prison. I was there not because I wanted to be, but because there was nowhere else to go. I had no home, no husband, not even hope. A few weeks later, I started hearing rumors. People were saying that Mark had started seeing Emma, a woman I vaguely remembered. She was a former model who had recently returned to our small town. Rumors spread quickly. Someone had seen them together at the farm, working side by side, with her helping him restore what was left after the fire. The rumors didn't die down. People said that Emma and Mark had grown close. She had become his new support, someone I could no longer be. She was helping him not only to rebuild the farm, but also to rebuild himself. They were often seen together in town, at the local cafe, at the market, everywhere we used to be. I felt bitterness and emptiness, my jealousy mixed with regret and pain. I realized I had lost Mark forever. He had found someone better than me, someone who was helping him move forward. I couldn't shake the feeling that my mistake had destroyed everything I had. With each passing day, I became more aware that my life had changed forever. I had lost him, lost our love, our home. And now I had to find a way to live with that. 2 months had passed since I left our home after the divorce. Time dragged on painfully slow, and the rumors about Mark and Emma grew louder. It seemed that everyone around was talking only about them. I heard that Emma was helping Mark restore the farm, supporting him during this difficult time, and that they had become inseparable. I tried not to think about it, but it was hard not to hear all the conversations swirling around. That night, when the storm hit with unprecedented force, I felt a sense of unease. The wind howled so loudly that it seemed to carry for miles. The rain poured down like a waterfall, drumming on the roof, and lightning ripped the sky apart, illuminating everything with a grim light. The night was threatening and full of tension. The lights were still on at Mark's farm. He was already asleep, trying to ignore the noise of the storm outside the window. But then, a deafening crack sounded, as if something massive had exploded. Mark jumped out of bed, his heart pounding furiously. He ran to the window and saw lightning strike directly on the roof of the large barn. Within seconds, the building started to burn. The flames grew, fueled by the wind and the dry wooden beams. Without thinking, Mark ran out of the house, barefoot on the wet ground. The rain lashed against his face, but he didn't stop. He reached the well and began filling buckets with water, but he realized that the wind and rain made it almost impossible. The barn burned brightly and quickly, and the fire had already started to spread to the nearby auxiliary building, where some tools and supplies were stored. Mark knew that these were too valuable to let burn. He ran back and forth between the barn and the secondary building, trying to pour water on the growing flames. but the fire was too powerful. He called the fire department, hoping they would arrive in time. But the weather was working against them. The storm made movement difficult. When the firefighters finally arrived, the barn was already consumed by flames, and the fire had spread to the storage area. They quickly began to contain the blaze, but there was too little time. The firefighters focused their efforts on saving the main house and the other structures, and soon they managed to bring the fire under control. The large barn and the auxiliary building were destroyed, but the main house and the rest of the farm remained intact. Mark stood watching them work, feeling a mixture of relief and bitterness. He realized that he had lost a lot, but not everything. That night became yet another test of fate for him. The fire had consumed a part of his work, but he knew he wouldn't give up. Now he had to restore not only the farm, but also his life. But first, he had to accept the reality that fate kept challenging him, time and again. It became clear when I heard that Mark and Emma had begun restoring the farm together. People saw them side by side, working to rebuild what had been lost in the fire. They were inseparable, or so everyone said. With each passing day, they grew closer. I heard about how they bought construction materials together, discussed plans, and there was no doubt that they had become a team, a real couple. Every rumor, every piece of news cut me to the core. I imagined them working, laughing, supporting each other through these hard times. How Emma inspired him, gave him hope. The very thing I had always dreamed of doing, she was doing for him now. Over time, I began to hear more details. People said that Mark had become a completely different person with Emma. He was no longer the grim and withdrawn man I had known in the last months of our marriage. He was laughing again, living fully, as if the burden of all these years had finally lifted from his shoulders. And then one day, I heard that Emma might be pregnant. The rumor spread quickly, and I didn't know what to believe. But the whispers were persistent. People were saying that Mark and Emma were expecting a child. My heart tightened with pain. This was what I had always dreamed of, but now it had become a reality for him and Emma. Every day I asked myself how this had happened. It was as if fate were mocking me. I had always wanted a child with Mark, but now that dream had come true, only for another woman. It felt like another punishment sent to me for my mistakes. I had lost not only my husband, but also the future we could have had together. Now he had a new life, a new love, a new family, and there was no place for me in it. I saw them together once, by chance, in town. They looked happy. Emma smiled gently, and Mark held her hand as if protecting her. I couldn't look away, feeling tears well up in my eyes. They looked perfect together, like a couple fate had brought together for a new life. At that moment, I realized that there was nothing more I could change. I had made my mistakes, and now I had to live with their consequences. My life, my dreams, all of it was now just a shadow of the past, and I had to start anew. But I knew that this path would be long and hard, and that I would never forget that I had lost Mark forever. I found out that Mark and Emma were enjoying a peaceful life on the farm from acquaintances who still lived nearby. They told me the farm had been completely restored, and that Mark and Emma worked together on every corner of it. They had made it better than it had ever been. Every time I heard their names, my heart filled with bitterness. I couldn't stop thinking about how they spent their time together, how they planned for the future. In my mind, they sat on the porch, smiling at each other, discussing how they would develop the farm or what their future child would be like. That thought tormented me the most. Mark was with her in a way I had never known him. Calm, confident, ready to overcome any difficulties. Her support gave him the strength I could never provide. She became for him what I failed to be, and that caused me unbearable pain. I realized that I had lost everything because of my mistakes. I was filled with regret about how I could have acted differently, how I could have restrained my impulses and preserved our love. But now it was too late. All I had left was the silence of my new lonely world and thoughts of how I would live on. I remained alone, reflecting on my future. I tried to find the strength to start over, but the past held me in its grasp, preventing me from taking the first step. Deep down, I knew I would have to live through this pain, understand it, accept it. Only then could I breathe again. It seemed that Mark and Emma had found their love and happiness, and all I could do was wish them well. Maybe one day I would find the strength to let go of my regrets and learn to live again.